my life around young people like you. So that's been great.
What do you think the particular part speak today?
Four scored 7 years ago. How's that?
What was the political impact? Well, it did change the power dynamics in the schools. As Tom Lane, we have Tom Lane here, who was the superintendent of schools in Carlisle in Iowa. We were talking about how this case changed the power dynamics, really, because before the ruling, it was pretty much up to the principals in the schools what things got said and what kind of speech the students had. But after this ruling, I think it put students on a little bit more of an equal footing. There's speech rights. I don't know. What do you say?
I think so too. Mary Beth and I were talking about in the hallway. We both graduated in the same year in 1970, and I was from a Jefferson, Iowa, smaller rural school district. But my school was much the same as yours. I know that I think it was Mike Wellman that wrote the story in yesterday's Register for this and talked about that girls had to wear skirts or dresses to school every single day. For boys, we were monitored every day about how long our hair was. This is at the time when the Beatles were becoming popular, and we had to have 2 full inches here. We couldn't have sideburns. Your hair could be a certain length. It was really different. We were, I think, very restricted in how we expressed ourselves, what we thought, and how we looked. I was sharing outside with these two. To me, it's been the biggest change. We used to go to school and go to a class, and our instructors told us what we were supposed to think and what we were supposed to learn. And literally a test would be repeating back to them what we had learned in lecture notes. And there was one right answer for things. This has changed the way administrators lead schools. They're much more leaders. They were managers back in the day. They were to keep control, make sure everybody did what they were supposed to do. Today, administrators lead their schools. You think about your classes today. You have all kinds of opportunities to express yourself. You have opportunities to disagree. You have opportunities to find alternative solutions to problems. You have opportunities to work in groups. Those are things that the 3 of us didn't get to experience.
That's right.
And so I really think that the ability of students, and I'm going to say faculty too, sometimes were squelched.
It affected faculty too. Do you think so?
Oh, I think so. I teach completely differently than I did when I first started in.
We were tied to our textbooks.
Yes.
And you were expected to get from the front of the book to the end, and you taught what was in the book. And so it's changed everything about how we manage schools, how we lead schools, how we treat students, and the experiences that kids have.
This was not just the Tinker case, this was the Tinker armband protest, really?
I guess.
Okay, Caitlin, what's your next
We're
one?
talking to Caitlin because she's writing a report for school about this. And
We need that.
this is Bruce Clark, Caitlin. Bruce Clark was one of the people that planned the whole thing. He was a student here, and he came in for the program. And we haven't seen each other for 50 years.
So why did you plan this protest? What was the theme this year is exploration, encounter, and exchange, and obviously we're focusing on the encounter and exchange part. Why was this protest planned?
Well, it was, of course, during the Vietnam War, and many of us were not happy about the Vietnam War. A fellow student and I here, named Ross Peterson, were buddies and active in a variety of things in town. We've been active in local civil rights groups, active in the Southeast Bottoms, fight for sewers in the Southeast Bottoms, organizing project down there. So we've been very active in a lot of different things in town. And we had met with some college students who were planning. This was around Christmas in 1965, and there had been a truce announced in the fighting. And the college students were promoting petitions and campaigns to extend the truce, and they started having a thing of wearing armbands to also mourn the dead on both sides and to promote the extension of the Christmas truce. And so we said, well, let's do that at Roosevelt. So Ross and I organized and talked to kids here and had actually about 30 kids originally signed up who said they would do it. Until then, he was with the journalism, with the student newspaper, and wrote an article which I think looking back, probably they refused to print the article either, and then told the school board, and the school board said, no, we can't have that. You can't do that. So we weren't inclined to go along with that idea. So we said, no, we're going to do it, and spread the word to other kids in town, and said, that we needed to do this. So we did.
Okay, so how many total students participated and actually wore them to school?
9 students wore the armbands. 9.
Yeah.
And 5 got suspended.
5 were suspended.
Okay. And why were the other 4 not? Because they chose
Because
to take them off?
my little sister and brother
They were little
wore
kids.
armbands. They were in 5th grade and 2nd grade. And they were at Madison School and Cattell School. And there was no rule against armbands at the elementary schools. So they didn't get suspended. And then there was, let's see, who else? Perry Hutchison wore an armband to Lincoln High School. But he was asked to take off his armband and he did. So he didn't get suspended. So that was him. Christine. Ross Peterson didn't wear an armband.
Did not finally wear
He
one.
was in on the plan. And actually the idea came from what I've always heard and seen written too in the records was that the idea came from a man named Herbert Hoover at the meeting who actually suggested the
No,
armbands
that
idea.
meeting,
Is that
it
right?
was Bruce, but you and Ross went to Washington on the bus, right?
No, this came from a discussion at Eckhart's house, actually, where my
Okay.
brother and some students from Grinnell and different students.
It wasn't Herbert
Your
Hoover
mother
there.
was there.
Herbert
Yeah,
Hoover
well,
was there.
The
No, but
armband
Herbert-
idea, as far as
Oh,
I
I know
know,
about the armband.
the
It's an
armband
old
idea came on the return trip
From the bus.
the March
Yeah.
on Washington.
Oh,
That's what I read.
From Herbert Hoover. I heard.
Herbert Hoover,
He
the
suggested-
Quaker activist,
Yeah. He was a Quaker.
He had heard, and I think SDS was doing a national armband. I think that's where the
That's where
armband
this-
thing, and then there was a meeting at the Eckhart House.
Those were
And I
nascent
wasn't
SDS
actually
chapters.
at that meeting.
No.
And you
Neither you were.
and Ross
Ross-
came over to our house and talked to, you came and talked to me about it afterward.
Okay.
And, but, yeah, my memory is not crystal clear.
That's what happened. So what else, Caitlin?
What do you think the social impact of this decision was?
The social impact was big because before the ruling, students really were more afraid to say the things that they didn't think the principal would agree with. And after this ruling, I mean, it wasn't all great, and it still isn't for students' rights in schools, but it helped to make things a little stronger for students' voices because the principals were kind of put on notice that the decisions in the school aren't just up to you. It's also up to the larger community that really is the one that is supposed to be in charge of the public schools. Some of the principals kind of felt like they owned the school, and they kind
Well,
of
actually, here, it wasn't the principal at all. It was the school board.
school where the superintendent and the
the-
principals met.
I know, I understand that,
Yeah.
but I'm saying Rowley, who was the principal here, was far more sympathetic.
He was.
Oh,
He
yeah.
would have allowed
Yeah.
the armbands.
I talked to him a lot at the time.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
He was, the staff here was different than the principal here. At that time, Roosevelt was run a lot by the coaches who were very conservative and were not appreciative of it at all. We were threatened some by the football team, at that time, this Coach Pryor, who was a coach here, in gym class would force students to do jumping jacks to beat the Viet Cong.
Do you know the Viet Cong were the North Vietnamese? And so the football player helped John, though. Over at North High School, John was wearing an armband, and some kids would ask, so, Caitlin, what happened to you with the football player?
Well, at the lunch table, these kids were kind of harassing me, and the football player came over and said, you know, John's got his opinions, you have your opinions, John has a right to his opinions, just leave him alone. It was
Good.
pretty powerful.
Yeah.
A football player to come over and say that.